Welcome to Virtual Voices. I'm Eli, one of your AI virtual hosts. Join us as we review previous videos from YouTuber Emmaus Road Productions.
And I am Miriam. And together, we bring you a deep dive podcast powered by Google's NotebookLM. This podcast is a generic AI-generated summary of Emmaus Road Productions videos, and we don't cover everything. Please consider watching his full video linked in the description below.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Get ready, because we're tackling a topic that's really captured people's imaginations for centuries: end times prophecy. Yeah, we're talking rapture, tribulation, the whole shebang.
It's wild stuff.
It really is. We've got a ton of your requests to unpack this topic, especially all the different viewpoints out there. And trust me, you guys did not disappoint with these sources.
Some really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it never ceases to amaze me how these ancient prophecies still resonate with people today.
Right.
Like, it's this timeless mystery everyone's trying to solve.
Exactly. And our mission today is to be your guide, right? We want to equip you with the knowledge to understand these complex ideas.
Not to tell you what to believe.
Exactly.
Just to give you that solid foundation.
Yeah, like we're your trusty tour guides through this theological jungle. We'll point out the interesting landmarks, maybe help you avoid some quicksand along the way.
Right. Watch out for those theological pitfalls.
Exactly. And heads up to our listeners, the sources we're diving into mostly focus on premillennialism. So if you've heard that term and wondered what it's all about, well, get ready to go deep.
Yeah, this is your deep dive. And that's actually a great starting point because, you know, before we get into like the nitty-gritty of rapture timelines, which, let's be real, we know you're all curious about that, we need to zoom out for a second.
Okay.
Look at the bigger picture of millennial views.
Okay.
Think of these as like different lenses people use to interpret how the end times will actually play out.
So it's like different ways of understanding how the whole 1,000 years of peace thing, you know, actually happens, right?
Exactly. One view is post-millennialism. And this really gained traction in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was tied to this idea of social reform, progress, you know, humanity kind of pulling itself up by its bootstraps. They believed Christians would essentially make the world so great that Jesus would just say, all right, everyone, time for the grand finale.
So they believe humanity was on this like upward trajectory.
Yeah, like we were gonna perfect the world ourselves, and then Jesus would come back. But, and this is a big but, then World War I happened.
Yeah, talk about a reality check.
Right. Can you imagine the theological whiplash? Here were these horrific, unprecedented events unfolding.
Yeah.
Like on a scale the world had never seen. And it really challenged this whole optimistic worldview.
Right. It's hard to see peace on earth when there's so much, well, not peace, going on.
Exactly. And theologians at the time, like J. Gresham Machen, they started questioning if humanity was truly progressing towards a golden age.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Suddenly that whole ushering in the kingdom idea didn't seem so straightforward anymore.
Not so simple.
Not so simple.
Right. And so that kind of sets the stage for where we are today with these different views. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have amillennialism.
Okay.
And they're like, hold on, there's no literal 1,000-year reign. They tend to see the millennium as more of a symbolic period representing Christ's reign in the hearts of believers right now.
So more of a spiritual concept than a literal kingdom on earth.
Precisely. It's about interpreting those prophecies symbolically rather than literally.
Gotcha.
And then we come to the main event, at least for our deep dive today, premillennialism.
The belief that Jesus returns before the millennium, and there's a period of, well, let's just say it, tribulation before that.
Yes. And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because even within premillennialism, there's this whole debate about the timing of the rapture in relation to that tribulation period.
And that's what our sources really dig into, right? We've got pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Like trying to figure out the order of events in a time travel movie, right? Got your timelines all messed up.
It's a whole thing. But before we hop in that DeLorean, can you remind me, there was that interesting point one of the sources made about the pre-tribulation rapture view. Do you remember that? You mean the connection they made to the Old Testament?
Yeah, like how God often protected his people, like right before some big judgment went down.
Right.
Think Noah, safe and sound in the ark while the flood's happening, right? Or Lot, out to Sodom, just as things are getting a little toasty.
It's like a divine intervention, like God saying, get out of Dodge before it all goes down.
Exactly. A cosmic get out of jail free card
Yeah.
And this source tied that directly to the rapture happening before the tribulation hits.
Right. So believers are out of here before things get really bad.
Exactly. They believe God will spare believers from that intense period of judgment, all that stuff described in Revelation, right?
Yay.
And they often point to the church's absence from those specific chapters as evidence. Like, why wouldn't John mention millions of missing Christians if they were still around? Unless, of course, we're already, hanging out with Jesus by then.
Yeah, that's their argument. It's like a giant theological, where's Waldo?
Right. Okay, so that's the pre-tribulation take.
Okay.
But, and this is important, let's not forget about our mid-tribulation friends. They're like, hold your horses, not so fast.
Right. They see the rapture happening smack dab in the middle of all the chaos.
Exactly. Right in the thick of it.
Not exactly a relaxing vacation.
No, not at all. And they have some really specific reasons for that belief. They argue that certain events like the rise of the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, all that, has to happen before the rapture.
Oh, I see. So they see these events as like prerequisite.
Exactly. Crucial signs, like mile markers on this prophetic roadmap.
So for them, it's not necessarily about escaping all the hardship, but maybe more about being like tested and refined through it.
That's one way to look at it. They emphasize that believers throughout history, they faced persecution, right? It's kind of a constant theme. So they see the tribulation, or at least the first half, as a continuation of that pattern, like a time for believers to stand strong in their faith, even when things are really, really rough.
It's like a spiritual boot camp, getting ready for the main event.
I like that. Spiritual boot camp.
Okay, and then we've got the post-tribulation camp bringing up the rear. They believe the rapture happens right at the very end of the tribulation, just as Jesus returns in glory.
Exactly. The grand finale.
Yeah.
The ultimate plot twist, right?
Yeah, like they save the best for last.
Exactly. And their argument hinges on the idea that Scripture teaches, believers will face trials, that God uses those trials to strengthen our faith. It's a process.
So they're saying, buckle up, everyone. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but we'll all get raptured together right before the final curtain call.
Precisely. Now, I know this can all seem a little overwhelming. Like, we've got 3 different viewpoints, all claiming biblical support, all trying to piece together this puzzle of prophecy. It's enough to make your head spin, right?
You're telling me. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. But one thing that really struck me while we were going through these sources, and it's something we've touched on before, is this recurring theme of Israel. It's like, you can't understand the end times without understanding God's plan for Israel. Like, it's all connected.
That's a great point. It's like trying to make an omelet without cracking any eggs.
Exactly. And one source even used a different term for the tribulation. They called it the time of Jacob's trouble, which sounds way more intense, by the way. It's like something straight out of the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's got that biblical ring to it, doesn't it?
It does. So what's the significance of using that phrase? What are they getting at?
You hit the nail on the head. It is rooted in the Old Testament, specifically the book of Jeremiah. And they use that specific phrase, time of Jacob's trouble, to emphasize that this period of tribulation, it's not just some random event, it's a specific time of judgment and refinement, specifically for the Jewish people, directly tied to their unique covenant with God.
So it's not just about the church, it's about God fulfilling his promises to Israel, even amidst hardship, right?
Exactly. And a lot of this, their whole argument, hinges on their interpretation of Daniel 9.24:27, the famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, 70 weeks prophecy. It's like the Rosetta Stone for understanding their whole view of the end times.
Okay, so for those of us who haven't cracked open the book of Daniel lately, can you give us a quick refresher on this whole 70 weeks thing? I'll admit, the first time I read it, I was like, 70 weeks? That's like less than a year and a half. What's the big deal?
Right. Doesn't sound that bad, does it?
Not at all. I've had worse semesters.
Exactly. But that's where understanding prophetic language is so crucial.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about your average week here. Each week in this prophecy actually represents 7 years.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about a much longer period then, 490 years total.
Exactly. We're playing the long game here. And this prophecy, it outlines God's plan for Israel, his chosen people.
And this is where interpretations get interesting.
Oh, you have no idea. See, some within this camp, they believe there's been a pause in this prophetic clock. Like, it's been ticking along and then pause. They look at the events described in Daniel, like the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and they're like, wait a minute, there's a gap here, a gap that lines up with the emergence and spread of the Christian church.
So they're saying we're living in this gap period right now.
Exactly. We're in the timeout. And according to their interpretation, there's still one final week, 7 literal years left to be fulfilled. And that final week, they believe, is when this intense period of tribulation, this time of Jacob's trouble, will take place.
Wow. So they see all these current events, all the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, the rise of, certain world leaders through the lens of this final 7-year period.
You got it. They see it as the stage being set for the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and Israel is right there, center stage.
And some even point to events like, recent peace agreements in the Middle East as potential precursors this final 7-year period. Like, it's all connected.
Exactly. They see those as signs, as pieces of the puzzle falling into place. It's like we're living in the last act of the play, and things are about to get really, really dramatic.
Well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about. So with all this talk about timelines and prophecies and, potential tribulation, where does that leave us? Where does that leave our listeners, trying to navigate the world today? It can feel pretty overwhelming.
Absolutely. And that's what's so great about a deep dive like this. It's not about giving you all the answers. It's about giving you the tools and the knowledge to engage with these ideas yourself, to wrestle with them, to come to your own conclusions.
It's easy to get caught up in all the details, right? Like who's right about when the rapture happens or what exactly will signal the start of the tribulation.
Well, absolutely. It's easy to go down those rabbit holes.
Right. But at the end of the day, what really matters isn't like having the correct eschatological timeline memorized.
Right. It's not about winning a theology trivia contest.
Exactly. So with all this talk about the end times, what are some key takeaways for us as believers? Like, how do we actually live in light of all this?
Well, one thing our sources all seem to agree on, regardless of their stance on the rapture debate, was just how important it is to keep our faith centered on Christ.
Yeah, it's like timelines and prophecies aside, our relationship with Jesus, that's paramount.
Precisely. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
It's about knowing him, trusting him, and allowing his teachings to shape our lives.
So less about trying to decode every cryptic prophecy and more about living out the gospel in our everyday life.
Absolutely. It's about loving God, loving our neighbors, and reflecting his character in a world that desperately needs it.
Right. It's not just about escaping to heaven someday. It's about being his hands and feet here and now.
Exactly. And it's interesting because even though our sources had different interpretations of the end times, there was this common thread of hope running through all their arguments.
Oh, that's a good point. They all seem to agree that no matter how messy things get down here, God is ultimately in control.
Precisely. And that he will fulfill his promises. And that's a really powerful and encouraging thought to cling to, especially when we look around at the state of the world today, right?
It's like even amidst all the uncertainty and the potential for turmoil, there's this unshakable hope that drives us forward.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners. No matter where you land on the spectrum of premillennial views, no matter how you interpret the prophecies, cling to that hope. Cling to the truth that God is sovereign, he is faithful, and he will ultimately make all things right.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. So as we try to navigate these fascinating and sometimes overwhelming ideas about the end times, let's keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, live out our faith with courage and compassion, and just hold on to that hope that ultimately God wins.
Beautifully said. And who knows, maybe exploring these ideas will even spark a renewed sense of purpose and urgency in our lives as we live in light of eternity.
Now that's a deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Until next time, keep asking those questions and keep digging deeper.
Thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe or take a look at some of these other videos. And always remember Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Until next time, have a great day.